Welcome on behalf of all of us. It's wonderful to have you on a special day, the Africa Day. Very excited and really fortunate that we could do this with Baobab team. We've been working with Liz for many years, so it's really great to bring the media community together to discuss about the narrative of Africa and how we can work together to change it. Very excited. We have today people from 19 countries registered to participate in this event. It is also a very special day, not just only Africa Day, which I want to wish you all happy Africa Day, but also I would like to just step back a little bit and give you a context of who we are and why we are here today and whose sacrifice really paved the way. And that's part of the narrative too. 2 years ago, Mr. Floyd was murdered, and that really created so much uproar in the United States, and very hard to imagine again. Yesterday, we lost about 21 little children in Texas. So there's so much happening in the world, what we are seeing in Ukraine, what goes on in Africa. This is really a pivotal moment for all of us to come together as human beings and really look at what we can do to make the world a better place, not only the continent where we come from, but also the communities in which we live, which really is all about the diaspora. And so we are, as an African diaspora, myself, Eritrean American, I always say that my road is paved for me and others like myself, thanks to the sacrifice of African Americans. I'm very grateful to them. And Africa Day is really a humanity day, in my opinion. And I celebrate all of you and the continent for what we are about to do and what we'll do in the future. So it's really exciting to have this conversation. The African Diaspora Network, we're based in Silicon Valley, California. We started about 12 years ago with an idea. How can we bring Africans and Friends of Africa together? The genesis of ADN was really simply to make sure that our voice was heard. When people speak about Africa, I wanted to make sure that Africans were at the table. When we found out that we were not really being invited, we said, okay, why can't we invite other people to come join us? And I'm very grateful that over the last 12 years, we have convened thousands and thousands of people through the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, through the Impact and Innovation Forum. And then we developed two fantastic accelerator programs. One is the Builders of Africa's Future, and then the other one is Accelerating Black Leadership and Entrepreneurship. The first one focuses on grassroots entrepreneurs in Africa. And the other one, the Accelerating Black Leadership and Entrepreneurship, focuses in supporting and really providing training, mentoring, and access to funding to Black entrepreneurs in the United States. So you can see that ADN is living its mission and vision. We wanted to do good in the continent where we come from and the communities in which we live. This event is possible thanks to the hard work of my team, Megan and Deborah, and of course, Dami, wherever you are, Dami, fantastic job. So I'm going to leave this now and give you Evelyn, who is going to be moderating the session. Thank you to all the speakers. Thanks, Liz, and everybody for this wonderful opportunity. What could be a better thing to do than to celebrate Africa with the people who have the capability to narrate our history on a daily basis. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Almaz. Welcome once again, everybody. It's so nice to be here. I just want to say a very big thank you to the Africa Diaspora Network, of course, our partners for this event, on behalf of Baobab Consulting and everyone who is here today. This event is actually very important in the sense that apart from being Africa Day, the conversation about projecting Africa in a truthful and even in a positive manner is one that I have pursued for nearly half a decade in my own professional experience. So I'm very excited to be here. I just want to quickly welcome our speakers. I would allow a few minutes for our speakers to just say a word of introduction of themselves. In no particular order, you can just unmute and say hi and just introduce yourself. to everyone. Meanwhile, I'm going to leave a link to the speaker bios where you can interact more with learning about the work that our speakers do, and even how you might contact or follow up with them after this event. So let's see, Chiku, you wanna go first? It's nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see everyone. Thank you. So my name is Shiko Kimeria. I'm Kenyan and I'm now based in Nairobi, but I lived in Senegal for the past 6 years. And I'm the Africa editor at Quartz, which is a media house focusing on technology, innovation, and business. But I call myself an adventurer, an explorer, a traveler, a storyteller, and I'm also a novelist, murder mysteries. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chico. Dare, can we get to meet you?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you to the Africa Diaspora Network and Baobab Consulting for having me. My name is Akindare Okunola. I am currently the Content and Communications Manager for Global Citizen for West Africa. Global Citizen is a nonprofit organization headquartered in New York that is working to end extreme poverty in the world by 2030 by campaigning on the global and the sustainable development goals. I have a background in journalism, new media, content strategy, and communications, and I live in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dare. And JC, hi JC. I'll just let you introduce yourself. You can just
Hello. You can hear me, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Hi,
I can.
thank you for having me. Thank you. My name is JC Whittington. I am based in Washington, D.C., and I cover politics, specifically how politics intersects with race, gender, and culture in the U.S.
Thank you. Is Felix here? Hi, Felix. You can just unmute yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. Hi Evelyn.
Hi. Okay, I see you now.
Yeah. Okay, great. So my name is Felix Maringa. I am the Nairobi-based correspondent for Deutsche Welle News, which is commonly known as DW News. We cover politics, human interest stories, and we also cover stories around economic impact of the various things that happen within the East African region. Our Nairobi office also plays host to the East African correspondent, so we cover the entire region: Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, Rwanda, and the entire East African region. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Of course, I'm based in Nairobi, and yeah, it's warm in Nairobi right now.
Yes, I know. Thank you so much, Felix. Wale is here. Can we meet you?
Just want to make sure I mute myself this time. Hi, my name is Adewale Adekanbi. I am a designer animator at NBC Universal. I'm also one of the co-leads of Black Employee Network, where we do internal events and initiatives to help our Black and Brown employees within the company to, feel wanted. Just to keep it simple, to just feel wanted. So, and this last month has been heavy for us. So I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Wow. So yes, that's all of our amazing speakers today. I'm so grateful to be your moderator for this event. My name is Evelyn Dan Epelle. I am a broadcast journalist at Captain TV Nigeria. I've had the pleasure of working with Baobab Consulting since April last year. And it's just been so amazing to connect with all of you here today, and not just my colleagues here present for the roundtable, but even my friends who are joining from different parts of the world. Trust that I can see everyone on this call. So let us just go off to building some foundation for the conversation today. which is on a roundtable, and we're welcoming African journalists in partnership with the African diaspora. An argument about the role of and place of the African diaspora on the continent, of course, have been built solely on the huge financial contribution that we know that the African diaspora has made towards the growth of the continent. But while this financial contribution is important, I think we can all agree that there's even more significance to the position that the diaspora community holds, as the vast majority of Africa's intellectuals and even professionals whose ideological contributions are equally beneficial to the growth and development of Africa are in the diaspora. I think that when we cast that knowledge against that of the media effect that framing news stories and even the propagation of news stories can have on people and young people especially, then we see how important it is for us to build this relationship, which we're hoping to do here today. So once again, I just want to welcome everyone. Think of this as a way to kind of connect the continent to her diaspora audience, and for the much needed information flow that needs to happen between the two groups. So I'm trusting that our speakers are very much ready to get into the questions. I'm going to ask the questions in no particular order, but I just looked at the speaker bios and I tried to match the questions that I have with me to the speakers who I strongly believe would share the most of their experience to that particular question. I want to start by speaking more on how much the media landscape has changed in the past 5 years. And it's interesting for me to talk about that because I have a unique experience of coming as a broadcast journalist from Nigeria and spending 2 years in study leave in Washington, D.C. during the heat of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I can tell that so much has changed, but I just want to hear from you. And I'm going to start with you, Chiku, because in your experience, you, of course, are very well traveled, especially here on the continent. And, you've shared stories of people from different parts of the world. How have you seen the media landscape changing in the past 5 years, particularly with the impact of COVID-19?
Okay. So when thinking, so I'll assume it's discussing global media. So when thinking of global media, I think some of the changes that have happened, especially when discussing the continent or Africa, is, we'll still see it. Forgive me, my baby, but she'll be quiet soon. But I think one of the big things that has happened is that it's become that we'll still see media houses that will have extremely negative coverage on the continent. But I think now people kind of walk with a bit of fear and trepidation. So even let me give you an example. The past few days, with monkeypox happening outside of the continent in the US and parts of Europe, journalists have been called out and big media houses have been called out because the pictures that are used to illustrate monkeypox are black and brown hands. So I think that's the thing that it's global media has always had this negative bias toward the continent, but it's becoming harder for them to get away with it.
Right. And I like what you're saying, because then that makes it seems to us now that the problems are apparent. It doesn't mean that the problems are new, but the introduction and even that heightened sense of the presence of technology has made the problem even more apparent. And, it's such a brilliant example you used of Western media using images of Africans for the monkeypox outbreak in Europe. I want to talk, that is a very common challenge that we see in terms of how media framing is done. But now I also want to talk about some of the challenges that might be even technical, for example, in terms of how much changes has taking place over time. I want to talk about the challenges that you have faced, not just those cultural and those ethical problems, but even technical problems. What are some of the technical problems that you have faced in terms of how you're conducting your work at this time?
Okay, when it comes to COVID, Oh, yes. When it comes to COVID.
Some of the technical challenges that you had.
I think some of the technical challenges come around also from due to movement. Like when, I can't say it directly affected me because Quartz is mostly a digital publication, but it does definitely become quite hard for some of the writers there's certain stories which you can only tell if you can move around. And I think the world, even Africa itself, has always been a particularly hard place for people to move around, even if you have an African passport. And the world seems to have become more insular during COVID. And then also after that, even during COVID, travel bans, we saw when Omicron hit, even though it's the South African scientists who discovered Omicron wasn't actually initially from the continent, but the travel bans were immediately issued against African countries. So if it was hard before for Africans to travel, whether it's for leisure or for work, it became even much harder for people to travel during and after COVID. And to do a lot of great journalistic work, you need to have that mobility.
Yes, I agree. I think mobility was one of the things that stood out. Dare, I know you're a multimedia journalist. You've been able to create different forms of content. Does the form of content or even the type of content you're creating, did you see any type of challenge that had to do with the form in particular? Or do you think that it was just everyone had a brunt to bear from all of these challenges that we faced over the times?
I think yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think yes. It definitely has its challenges. I think similar to what Chico was saying earlier, we tend to think about like how things affect the continent from a global perspective, like is what that Western narrative is that most of the world generally rolls with. But the thing is, just the same way everywhere in the world there are challenges, within African media as well. There are also challenges, and especially with something like the pandemic. And so people react or have a different way of looking at things, given something that is so massive and has shaken the whole world. So I think in terms of the formats in which we create content, obviously the internet is super dominant at this time. So and different platforms also make different moves and are adapting different things based on what's happening in the world as well. So I would say that like it's not different from the way it is anywhere else in the world. I think whether it's video, it's text, it's audio, I think the baseline challenges are pretty similar in terms of how it affects the consumers or the audience, right? Or how it influences policy, etc. So I think it's just the differences will all come down to local context, right? So the way people are going to react to a video about something in South Africa, for example, is going to be different from the way people are going to react to a video about that same thing in Nigeria. I'll give you an example. There's something called Freedom Day that happens in South Africa, right? And it's a big thing, right? It's a national celebration, right? And so if you are a journalist or a content creator, etc., in South Africa, around Freedom Day, that would be something that you'd want to key into or you want to plug into. But you can't come and replicate that in Nigeria, for example, because there is no Freedom Day in Nigeria. And the reason why a Freedom Day exists in South Africa, those reasons don't exist here. So I think the challenges as far as formats all boil down to locality and like local context. So daily newspapers might be more popular in a certain region of the continent versus another region of the continent, right? While maybe sports magazines or other types of media might be more popular in different areas or different areas. So I think, the challenges all, the way they manifest all come down to local context regarding the formats.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Dari. I like that distinction that you're making between local and global. And maybe this is something that Felix can help us with, because, you know, in your work as a journalist and in your own experience professionally, you've come from working in local media to working, you know, with global media. So Felix, do you see any difference really in terms of the working styles, be it traditional media versus even media startups? And what are those differences and why do they even matter?
Yeah, there are a number of differences. And with local media, the thing is, anything that happens could be news. Are you okay?
Yeah, I can
Yes.
hear you now.
Okay. So with the local media, anything that happens is news. So today, some politician will do ABCD. Like in Kenya, there's a lot of politics in our media. So any particular political pronouncement, anything that has been said either by political leaders or people who are intending to vie for office, especially this year being an election year, anything makes it to the media. But what happens when it comes to now the international space, the stories are limited in terms of the regional outlook. So that if you're doing a particular piece in Nairobi about COVID vaccines that are coming in or COVID inequalities, you're looking at COVID inequalities, not just in Nairobi, but how global nations or the bigwigs in different countries have gone up to take all the vaccines and the remainders are just sent to Africa. So when you're shooting a story in Nairobi about the COVID vaccines, you're not just looking at Nairobi as an entity, you're looking at Nairobi as a representative of Africa. And that changes the way you even address, because even when you're mentioning statistics, you'll also look at maybe a country like Nigeria, they received this number of vaccines. A country like South Africa received this number of vaccines. Something that is very different with the local media, because most of the people who watch local media are just interested in knowing what's happening in the four corners of our nation. But yeah, when it comes to the international space, you have to think about a regional outlook. So there are stories that would easily find their way to the local media space or even the local media blogs and newspapers, but they cannot find their way in the international space. Yes.
Wow. You know, you've just opened up something interesting. And I think this is, I'm just going to quickly shift to JC because I don't want to lose that trail of thought. JC, you've come, you're there in Washington, D.C. You've come from what a local TV station to now working at Politico. When it comes to reporting, just like Felix is saying here, when it comes to reporting on the African continent specifically, do you see any types of priority in reporting the African continent from the international media and even the local media? Is there some kind of quota system that says 30% or 20% of the reportage has to come from Africa? Does any of such even exist in the first place? And do you see any overlap in such interests between reporting on Africa and reporting on even African American community there in the US?
Local news, not so much. I think just as explained, a lot of people are very hyper-focused on what's going on in their particular community, and that's right there in front of their faces. But I will say that there is a large Nigerian community surrounding the capital in Washington, D.C. And so when things do happen like intra-community in those areas, that's when we see more coverage of the continent and of the country specifically. But like local news is not that much focus. Now, international news, now that I've moved from local news to Politico, we do have specific teams that cover what's going on the continent. I think that not as much as it should be. Like there isn't a, I wouldn't say that there is a large team dedicated to focusing what's going on in the continent, different places on the continent, but I think that that is an area that definitely needs improvement, because a lot of the times that ends up happening is like, when there is something that is newsworthy for coverage, there's like this mad dash, this mad rush to try to figure something out. Okay, how do we cover it? Who can we ask to cover it? Instead of already having those systems in place where it's not so much of a reactionary type thing, but something that's already established and regular coverage of.
Wow, thanks for that insight. I would also love to hear from Wale, because I'm sure I can tell that you have a similar experience. Do you see more focused Africa-focused reporting from the diaspora? Do you see that?
Actually, at NBC, I only see when there's trauma. If there's something bad going on, then they'll cover it. But if there's something good going on, they have no interest. So that's the one thing I've noticed in American news and general media. We'll cover trauma. That's my one takeaway. And I just wanted to chime in on what somebody said earlier about as far as like making sure like the black hands isn't the one that's used as far as representative of different or negative things. Being that I'm in graphics, I have to deal with that a lot. It's hard for me just to find B-roll and stock images of positive roles for Black people in general. Even if I wanted to do an executive, I don't want to make a background using successful entrepreneurs. It's hard for me to find. So that's right. That's part of the problem. It's already built into the system that you can't even find B-roll or stock images in order to try to create a positive view of people of color in general, not just Americans and Africans. And it's already built in. So that's part of the problem. Like I feel like we have to start building our own repositories and then basically settle into them. As if we're the new Getty, Afro-Getty, whatever we're going to call it, and so that they have some place to look, because it's an easy lift if we give them some of the resources for some of these things that we think they should be doing.
Right.
So, but
these are all really good insights, and I see that you're more into very focused reporting on people of color. When it comes to even getting people to share their stories, how do you what kind of tips can you offer us in terms of getting people to share their stories, one, and how best can we even get any type of initiative from the Black community covered by the media, particularly African media? What are some of the tips that you use in like chasing and covering these stories? Wale, that's for you.
Oh, apologize. Well, usually what I do is when I try to pitch stuff is I go to the people that I know that I have relationships with. As long as I work at CNBC, as long as there's money involved, they'll do it. So they follow the money. So you have to yourself figure out how to sell it and say, hey, this company made $5 billion. They're the largest African company in this field. And if they see money, then they'll say, okay, let's put, John Ford or, another one of my reporters on it to sort of cover it. So, but it's not going to be on their radar. You got to bring it to them. So that's part of it. So like, and I'm in graphics, right? So I'm steadily pitching work to on-air folks all the time. So sometimes they'll do it and sometimes they won't, based on the amount of stories that they have. Like, it's not going to be in the top 10. So in the light news day, I might get it in. So that's part of the problem there.
Right. Thank you so much. I think there's so much insights coming from here. And, I'm constantly thinking about solutions and how we can, match credible solutions to all of the problems that we are highlighting here. And this brings me back to discussing challenges, especially the challenges we have supporting those who cover stories in the diaspora. Chico, I want to ask, because, one of the things that I depend on professionally is the reports that come from Quartz Africa, the Africa reports. Of course, that's something that I think everyone should be subscribed to, that aggregates stories from all across the continent. I think it's very beautiful. Chico, I want to know, what type of support do you need in terms of your work as Africa editor at Quartz? What types of support would you say that you need from diaspora in terms of sharing their stories?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I also saw something Almaz had mentioned in the questions, where she was asking, what type of information can we share? So I'm quite open to getting pitches on ideas. And I think the best way to show just the diversity of types of stories we've covered when it comes to African diaspora, I can mention some headlines. So I know we did one on Kabilam, the Senegalese, he's Senegalese, but based in Spain or Italy and Spain, I think. And he became one of the few TikTok megastars. So we've done a story about that. We did a story on how Ugandan is Daniel Kaluuya. So asking, like, he's big, but how do Ugandans perceive him given he didn't really grow up there? So that it was almost a provocative headline, but also an interesting one. We've done stories, when it comes to African Americans, we've done stories about the year of return in Ghana, and covering just how there's more increased interest by African Americans and other Black diaspora to come back to certain African countries, which have become more receptive to exploring the dark history of slavery, but also to saying we are trying to see how we can't undo the past, but we're trying to see now how we can move forward, knowing that we are all united as Black people and as people of African descent. We did a story, this one I'll mention for Almaz's benefit. I don't remember his name, but Lauren Landon's husband, he's Eritrean American. And when he was killed, we did a story about the influence that he had in the Eritrean American community, but also the influence that the Eritrean American community had in the country. So I think all those are just to say that we're quite receptive. We're always just trying to find what's the right story that is of interest to a wider audience, but also is interesting, is important. So I would say the best way, if you think there's a particular story that could interest us and is news, and it's usually better if it's newsworthy. Yes, we did a recent one too on the new Doctor Who. So this is, I think anyone who is British will know that Doctor Who is a very big deal, but the new Doctor Who, the first Doctor Who is actually, they just had the first Black Doctor Who, and he was a Rwandese. He was actually a Rwandese refugee of the genocide, and now he's in, a huge celebrity in one of the UK's biggest shows. So I would say there's a whole wide range of stories that will interest us. And I think maybe the thing that's coming out in all these stories is the human element is the most interesting. So of course we also do stories on remittances and such things, but I think we like that part where there's the human element. And another story too that's in the works was Serena Ventures. So Serena Williams is now investing a lot. So this is tech and tech meets celebrity meets, I guess, awesomeness. But Serena Ventures is investing a lot in Black-owned startups, but also has invested in a few African-owned startups. So that's another story that we thought is interesting to a wider audience, but also to a Quartz Africa audience. And I've dropped in the notes where you can send pitches to.
Nice. Thank you so much, Chico. I really want Felix to also say something about this, because this is something he brought up earlier when he was speaking. Felix, do you want to?
Yeah, actually, when it comes to the people in the diaspora and covering their stories, one, we have mostly concentrated ourselves on the East African region. So, of course, recently Safaricom, which is one of Kenya's biggest telco, opened office in Ethiopia. And of course, we were following up on some of the things that were going on there, backstories. But as Chico said, most of the time when such stories pop, we find the human element tends to take precedence. And so, of course, yes, we will cover what Safaricom is doing. We'll cover what other people outside of the country are doing. But when it gets the human element, then it gets even more interesting. There is a story that we covered some time back when I was still at KTN News of a Kenyan who opened a ranch in Namibia, and it was doing perfectly well. He's actually been selling cows and milk to the local community in Namibia, and that was just a whole difference in the stories that people are used to seeing each and every day. Of course, there are those particular stories about what we've imported into the country, and I think that now becomes the main problem, because when you look at most of the startups in Nairobi, they're either being funded by organizations abroad, and they have a very clear communication line that this is where, this is what we are supposed to tell the media. This is how we approach the story. So yes, you will see a 25-year-old doing fintech, and behind the scenes, this fintech is actually owned by other people, you see, and mostly it's the white community. And it begs the question, how else are we able to tell this story without leaving out the influence or the investment that has been made by these white individuals, but also give credit where it is due? Because these young people have taken their time, they've invested their knowledge to come up with particular inventions that are transforming the Kenyan narrative or the African narrative. And just one of those particular cases is like M-Pesa in Kenya. The M-Pesa story is now being replicated in many other regions of the world, and it's something that began in Kenya. But it got a little bit of credit online at some point, but it hasn't been told as a story that came from Kenya by Kenyan, and it needed some more investment. And what happens with the media houses that are there locally, or even the international media generally, we lack the aspect of day two stories, where if we did something yesterday and highlighted M-Pesa, 5 years, 10 years down the line, we need to tell people that this is what this African is doing about a particular story. And I think when you look at the onset of the Africa Day and reason as to why the African leaders actually met in Addis over 5 decades ago, it was for this particular reason, that people would own the African story. So I think if we inculcated the aspect of day two story, then we'd be able to tell the diaspora story much better as compared to just a one-hit wonder and we leave it at that.
Thank you so much. That was really a lot. You know, still coming back to solutions journalism, you know, Felix, you've talked so much and highlighted so much challenges. I want to make sure that we're matching solutions to every of the challenges that we're highlighting here, so that the conversations can be on how to execute those solutions and not just re-emphasizing the challenges. And so I'm just in a summary response manner. JC, I want to start with you. When it comes to international and diaspora media, what are your suggestions for the ways that we can be more deliberate in telling news stories, niche stories? What are some of the things we need to do? What types of action do we have to take to deliberately tell the African stories?
I think one way we can do this is having, when you speak about deliberate, it's just like having a deliberate focus on more regular coverage. I think sometimes when it comes to certain stories, we're very reactionary, especially stories that involve trauma. And that's not a way that you want to cover a community consistently. It's like you want to have a footprint in a community where it's like we're going to cover all of the good things that's happening along with all of the newsworthy things that are happening that you may need to know about. But I think definitely more so shifting the focus from doing this sort of like reactionary trauma, like the shiny. A lot of times as journalists, we go after the big shiny things and the things that people are, that's trending online or that people are talking about. But oftentimes, I guess we have to ask ourselves, poverty porn, yes. And so oftentimes I think we have to ask ourselves, like, who is controlling the news narrative? Is it the audience? Is it the journalist? Or is it like the news organization, like the larger news organization in itself? And who gets to decide what's newsworthy and what's not? And so sometimes we find ourselves as journalists, like, especially if our work is measured by the amount of views that we get and the amount of clicks that we get, we're like, well, our audience is talking about this. We have to cover this because our audience cares about it. But there is also an onus on the journalist where it's like, you have a responsibility to cover communities adequately, whether, this may not be connecting to whatever trend is going on right now, but that as a journalist and as doing your research, that this is an important topic that you need to be talking about right now. And so there's the challenge is the balance of that. But I think when we get to understand more of, there's certain news that we have to do for viewership, but then there's certain news that it's our responsibility to do for education purposes and for us to lend our platform to give people that do need voices, that not need voices, but that need the amplification of their voices to be heard. And that's a huge part of what journalists do. So I think it's kind of, we're juggling back and forth of like, do we do this for clicks or do we do this because this is like the ethical, this is the reporting that we signed up to do. These communities need their voices heard, and not just when there's something bad happening in them, but all year round.
Wow, thank you, JC. I think what I hear you saying is that we need to shift our perspective from just like chasing things that are so grandiose to looking more into niche reporting and niche stories. Wale, I would also want to hear from you in terms of matching solutions to the challenges that we've highlighted. Since we know that there's absolutely nothing we can do to American news always, or Western news, always broadcasting trauma and negative stories on the continent that affect the continent. What do you think we can do more deliberately to increase positive reportage from Africa? Because I know that one way to counter negative would be to do more positive. And to what extent do you even see that possible? Because we're not comparing apples with apples in terms of growth and development and investment, and what it would take to actually tell stories in that capacity. So going off that sense, what are some of the solutions to the negative reportage, and how do we amass positive reportage?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I feel like we have to be more proactive as people in the journalism field, where we accentuate the people who are doing positive things. Like maybe, for example, we could, like for CNBC, talk about Joomla Technologies, how they when they got on the NYSE stock exchange, it rose up, or I forget how many percent, but it was like a large rise. So it was a successful launch of an African company on the New York Stock Exchange. So maybe then we follow up with that and follow that story ourselves and just keep dropping it every couple of months of successful companies, or maybe who's the next one, right? What's the potential next big African companies to come up? So like we start crafting the narrative ourselves. That's something that they might want, because they see, okay, wait, this was a jump off. We want to be the first one to report in the next one, right? So that could be a way to handle it. We can also talk about stories like something niche, like for example, how Black Americans and Africans are buying crypto, and in a larger percentage to, as far as the amount of people buying into it than white Americans. Things like 3 and 10, and I think it's like 2 and 5 of African Americans and Africans who are buying into crypto. So why is that? Right? There's stories within that, positive and negative, right? So some of the things we can sort of like push forward stories that they might want to hear but we know we'll also talk about people in the diaspora, right? So we can't just leave it up to them and just say, hey, you know, they're going to come up with the stories. I think a lot of owners have to be on us to push for those stories. You know what I mean? Like, I think the solution is not a one fix all solution to it, because they're people. It's not a machine, right? It's you have to convince people to do things the right way. So how do you do that? You have to converse and you have to work with them, right? You bring them in instead of calling them out, right? So that's what I see.
Thank you so much, Wale. You know, Dari was saying something earlier just similar to what you've said now, and that just confirms that you know, our concerns are genuine, and the solutions that you've also preferred here is credible. So going back to you now, Dari, we were talking earlier about how difficult it is to find B-roll footage sometimes, which leads then to the portrayal of the Black community in reportage on trauma, suffering, and so on and so forth. What do you think we can do in terms of supporting Africa media to stack up on B-roll footages or even content that's more holistic to the continent, so that, you know, we can bridge that gap in terms of financing such projects, in terms of even, you know, organizing or coordinating the idea around such a project? What do you think we can do in order to create more content, more Africa, Black content for our repository?
I think, again.
No, sorry. That was for Dari.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was for you. Yes.
No
He's the
problem.
content creator.
I think, just like you said, like, investment is a big point. I actually have former colleagues that have tried to build a repository of African images here from Nigeria, and it's expensive. It's you know, it also requires a lot of technical expertise. It requires a lot of internet access, etc. So I'll say investment, both financially and technically. You know, technical knowledge is like, I can't overstate how important those two things are, because the only reason why you don't find B-roll footage or images of Black people, you know, doing successful things. Sorry, pardon my dog. The reason why you don't find those things is because it's either it's super expensive to set up a Flickr or an Unsplash or etc. Or it's very difficult for creators and photographers and people that take those type of images to either make money from those images or maintain or be assured of their copyrights or intellectual property rights as far as that content is concerned. So those are just some of the barriers.
Dari, sorry to interject, because I knew your dissent was going to be, those are some of the barriers. In this wrap up, we're speaking more to solutions. So you've seen these problems, you've been there over time. If we were to think no limits, right, and we had all of the resources in the world, how do we match that problem? How do we solve it? I'm speaking now to solutions. What do you think is the solution? How do we go back and help your friends who have attempted and failed? Why did they fail? And how can we, if we had to do it again, what should we do differently?
Yeah, I already mentioned at the top, finance, investment in two ways: financially and technical expertise. And then the next phase after that is to cultivate a skilled group of creators that can then go out into the world and express themselves in their art, you know, through their photographs, through their videos, telling stories about what's happening in their local environments. And I think after that, the next thing we just need is a little bit of hyperlocal journalism. In the unfortunately, I shouldn't be using an American example, but that's what exists. You have a certain town can have its own newspaper, its own sort of media, radio station, etc. Just a little town might have maybe 2,000, 5,000 people, right? Those kind of things are not commonplace here, right? So it takes a longer time for the stories to filter out from the local communities out into the world and into, the state regions or the countries or, the regional areas. So yeah, I'll say, so just to sum it all up, financial investments, technical investment in terms of technical knowledge, cultivating a skilled creators and sort of, encouraging people to go out and do what they think is best, express themselves in their art and their creativity, and then hyperlocal journalism. I think those are the solutions to equating the current gap between how Africans and Black people in general are represented in media now versus that future where we can make our own case.
Yes, thank you. It makes so much difference when we talk about solutions than when we keep hitting on the problem. So thank you so much, Dare, for I like how you highlighted that one after the other, and so we're not going to forget it. Felix, I see your hand is raised. Just 1 minute, maybe you want to wrap this up.
Okay, so still on the same line for creating a repository, I'd say we bring more people on board. That is with the citizen journalism. Sometimes a single image at the scene tells a lot. Like when we had the train bombed in Nigeria, there were just a few people at the scene. So if you were to encourage more people to even send footage to the media houses, maybe they've recorded with their mobile phones, it could help create more images. And then we also need to digitize the footage that was taken years ago. What has happened over the years, media houses have a lot of footage that has been taken and it's still in SD cards that could easily either be spoiled or could probably be destroyed at one point or the other. But if you were to be able to digitize that, yes, it's expensive, but digitizing will ensure that our today generation creates enough material for the guys who will come in the days to come. So I think those two we can add to what else my colleague said. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Wale, I don't know if you want to say something. I could see.
Yeah, this is right up my alley. So this, I needed to chime in. So I'm actually trying to tackle this at CNBC. We actually brought in, there is a website right now that started up, I say last year. It's called POC Stock, POC Stock. And right now they have lots of images, stock images of people of color, not just African Americans or Africans, but people of color. And they're a startup, they're new, so they started a solution. But as far as journalists is concerned, what I think we need to do is basically almost, I don't know, there's NABJ over here, there's a lot of different journalist groups. I'm like, why don't we say contact journalism groups and say, hey, listen, guys, let's start almost like a social media site where we share images that we've captured, because a lot of times we send shooters out to do stuff custom because we don't have. So share that footage, have a thing where we can share certain things that we're not using, but it might be relevant for someone else, right? And if we're all sharing and not worried about who has rights or this and that, it'll work. As long as I feel like if it stays within the journalism group, maybe people won't feel like, oh my God, you got to pay me for that. Right? I sent my shooter to go do this. But if you're sending something your shooter sent, okay, then I'll exchange and I'll give you something from my shooter. So maybe we can do something like that around the world, and then we'll build up the repository. It could just be one thing from each group. That itself, if you think the amount of groups and amount of journalism groups that we have in the world, if we all just share one thing, we will probably have thousands of images just from that alone. So let's just think about over a course of a year, course of 2 years, that could be the start of something, you know, share with each other, you know what I mean? And that will cost, you know, that shouldn't cost money. I don't care if it's like the largest Dropbox.
A bold idea. Data collection can be a lot, but it's good that we're putting all these ideas out. Chiku has something to say quickly. I'm just going to read the comment JC left in the group, and she says, I also think we have to create a pipeline for African and African Americans to infiltrate larger media organizations who lack diversity. Hello, diversity hiring. So each person who has a position in a large media organization has a responsibility to make space for others who look like them to come into the media organization as well. Each one, reach one. Thank you so much, JC. I think that's such interesting contribution there for hiring. Chiku, do you want to quickly?
Yes. So in terms of solutions, I wanted to give a shout out to 2 organizations. So it's not necessarily related to diaspora, but 2 organizations that I think what they're doing is interesting in diversifying the voices that can be had. So one is actually an initiative that was started today, which is called Experts on Africa. And the founder, the big thing that drove her was she noticed you go to events, whether it's in Davos or different parts of the world, and there'll be a whole panel on Africa and no Africans there. So they're actually starting a database where people can put in their own details and say, I'm a microbiologist, these are my details, I'm a this, that. So no one can have an excuse for, okay, we couldn't find any Black person or any African to be on these panels. So that's one thing. Another one is it's a site, it's an agency called BIRD. The Kenyan in me will say BIRD, but it's BIRD, B-I-R-D, Africa No Filter. So they looked years back and they said a lot of the stories that are being told about Africa are quite negative and are always episodic. It's about there's politics, there's famine, there's this, but where are the features on interesting people doing interesting things? Where are the happy stories? Where are positive news? So they actually have a whole agency. And the best thing about them being an agency versus a publication is they allow different media houses to republish from them. So you can just go on BIRD, Africa No Filter, create your profile, and you can be able to, if you work in a media house that allows you to republish, you can be able to find some interesting, diverse content on the continent. Then the last thing I was going to say, not just organizations, but now in terms of actual solutions on how we can, change the stories that are coming out, is opening up opportunities. Because maybe one of the things we don't realize is everyone who's here you're in a position where you might not realize it, but you're in a position where you can actually open up opportunities for other people. And in my example, I actually started off as a freelancer with Quartz in 2016. I pitched many stories. I don't think the stories I pitched were great. And finally, I pitched a story. The former editor picked it. And after that, 40 articles later, I became the Quartz Africa editor. And I always look at it as he took a chance on me. And I do the same. And I'm lucky that I get to work with freelancers because I get pitches. And as long as the pitch is interesting, the story is timely, and the writer is good, I'm always willing to take chances on new writers because I know I am in a position where I can give them an opportunity to have a voice with a larger platform.
Thank you so much, Chiku. I feel so full right now and saturated with all of the wisdom that's been shared here today. I'm really grateful to our organizers, the Africa Diaspora Network, and of course, my colleagues at Baobab Consulting that have continued to project Africa in a very positive manner through collaborations and partnerships. I want to thank everyone who took our time to be here today. I hope that I have covered all the questions. I tried to shrink all the questions together to ask our colleagues, but I'm just going to say that if anyone has further questions, you can just send us an email and we will immediately reach out to the speaker who you want to respond to your question and get you a response.